The boy appeared in Oakridge in the winter of 1847, when the snow lay heavy over the roofs of the cabins and the sound of the frozen river carried farther than a human voice. He was noticed first at the Harrington farm, standing by the gate with a gaze that seemed both blank and ancient. He called himself Samuel. His clothes were too thin for the weather, and his face was too pale for a child who claimed to have walked miles alone. Yet the strangest detail was not his frailty, but the absence of time in his features. His eyes were too steady, his composure too rigid, as if life had failed to leave its imprint on him. It was the local physician, Dr. Isaac Rowe, who took the earliest notes. He had seen children born with defects, young men broken by labor, and the elderly carried off by fevers. But Samuel confounded him. He appeared to be perhaps 10 years old, and yet he carried himself with a calm endurance that unsettled the adults around him. Rowe wrote in his ledger, "The child's skin holds no blemish, his teeth no stain, and his eyes no flicker of childish restlessness. His silence bears the weight of years unspoken." For the first weeks, Samuel spoke little. He was housed by the Harrington family, who fed him, clothed him, and tried to coax from him some story of his origin. But he evaded direct answers. His only consistent phrase, repeated with an air of resignation, was, "I've been here before." The neighbors dismissed it as delirium from exposure, yet it lingered in Dr. Rowe's thoughts long after he left the boy's side. The first sign that something more was amiss came not from Samuel himself, but from the animals. The Harringtons' dogs, ordinarily restless and loud, grew strangely subdued in his presence, watching him with tilted heads and refusing to bark. Horses turned away when he passed the stables, stamping the ground uneasily. Dr. Rowe noted that even infants, when brought near, grew silent, as though the boy's stillness had enveloped them. It was not fear exactly, but something deeper, like recognition. By the end of the second month, rumors spread through Oakridge. Some claimed the boy was an orphan left behind by travelers. Others whispered he was an ill omen, a changeling placed in the village as some punishment. The local minister spoke of the trials of Job, urging his congregation not to fall into superstition. But Rowe could not dismiss what he observed. The boy did not change. Weeks passed, and where ordinary children would flush with growth or sicken with cold, Samuel remained untouched. His face neither brightened nor dimmed. His frame never thickened nor weakened. Time passed around him, but seemed unable to lay a hand upon him. The midwinter thaw revealed the body of a drowned man in the river, unknown, unclaimed. When asked if he recognized the stranger, Samuel said nothing, but his hands trembled for the first time. Dr. Rowe saw it and marked it down. It was the only evidence of mortal weakness he had displayed. That night, when the physician sat alone at his desk, he asked himself aloud a question that troubled him more than the drowned corpse. What if the boy is not surviving time but escaping it? The Harrington family clung to kindness, treating the child as one of their own. But Rowe could not shake the unease that Oakridge was sheltering a secret beyond reason. He had seen fevers spread, wounds heal, even miracles of sudden recovery, but never a child immune to the passage of days. Samuel Harrington remained a puzzle, silent, watchful, carrying some truth within him that no man yet dared voice. But in the third month, when the first blossoms broke through the thawing earth, he whispered to Rowe a sentence that made the doctor's blood run cold. "I remember dying here once before." The words unsettled Dr. Rowe more than any fevered delirium he had ever heard. Children spoke in fancies, yes, but not with the calm assurance of memory. Samuel had not whispered it like a frightened dream. He had stated it as fact, as though he had merely recalled the way the sun set the evening before. The physician pressed him, asking what he meant, but the boy simply turned his gaze to the window where frost still clung to the glass. and said nothing more. It was then that Rowe began to speak privately with townsfolk, quietly gathering impressions of Samuel without alerting them to his concerns. Mrs. Harrington reported that the boy often woke at dawn, standing silently in the yard before anyone else stirred, as if waiting for something. The Harrington daughters said he sometimes hummed melodies they had never heard, old tunes that seemed neither folk nor hymn, but older, sadder refrains. One farmhand claimed he saw the boy tracing symbols in the dirt near the barn, though when pressed, he admitted they could have been meaningless scratches. Animals remained curiously unsettled by his presence. One evening, a milk cow broke through the fence and ran into the woods, a frenzy unprovoked, except for Samuel standing quietly nearby. Dr. Rowe noted the pattern. Creatures sensed what men refused to admit. There was something unnatural about the child's stillness, something more than mere trauma or sickness. Midway through spring, a girl from a neighboring farm fell into the mill pond. She was rescued, but when she awoke, she swore that a boy had pulled her beneath the surface and whispered her name. The villagers dismissed it as a dream caused by the shock of nearly drowning, but the girl described him too precisely. Pale, steady eyes, a voice calm even in the water. Dr. Rowe wrote in his notes, "The child begins to appear in visions not only his own, but those of others. Whether delusion spreads by fear or some other mechanism remains uncertain." The physician considered rational explanations. Perhaps Samuel was no older than he seemed, but stunted by malnutrition. Perhaps he repeated stories he had overheard, and the villagers, hungry for mystery, gave them supernatural weight. Yet every time Rowe placed these possibilities before himself, they collapsed against the boy's own demeanor. He was not a fanciful child. He bore himself with the composure of someone who had endured too long. His silences carried more weight than his words. And then came the first incident no one could dismiss. A storm had rolled through Oak Ridge, and lightning struck a tree near the Harringtons' home. The villagers gathered to cut it down before it crushed the barn. In the chaos, a heavy branch fell toward one of the men. Samuel, standing several paces away, called out a warning in a voice sharper and older than his usual calm tone. "Move now!" The man leapt aside just as the wood crashed where he had stood. What chilled Rowe was not the timing, but the certainty. The boy had shouted before the branch even cracked loose. That night, when asked how he knew, Samuel answered simply, "Because I was here when it killed him once before." The statement spread through Oak Ridge faster than the storm's memory. Neighbors began to watch him with unease, mothers drawing their children closer, men crossing themselves when he passed. Dr. Rowe recorded every word, yet as he set down his pen, he realized he had no theory to contain it. He was no longer a physician chronicling a case. He was a witness to something that pressed against the borders of time itself. And Samuel, though silent for much of the day, finally turned to the doctor with eyes too steady for his age and asked, "Do you believe me now, or will you wait until you see it yourself?" The challenge in Samuel's voice lingered with Dr. Rowe long after the boy had left the room. It was not the defiance of a child seeking attention, nor the bluff of one inventing tales. It carried the quiet conviction of one who had endured disbelief before and expected it again. Rowe, though schooled in anatomy and the rational sciences of his day, felt himself cornered by something for which no textbook had prepared him. In the weeks that followed, Oak Ridge grew restless. Strange events clustered around the boy with an uncanny rhythm. Crops failed in patches where he lingered, though weather elsewhere remained fair. The church bell tolled once in the night with no hand upon its rope. A blacksmith's forge flared white-hot without fuel, scorching the walls and nearly burning his shop to the ground. Each occurrence had explanations, of course. Soil sickness, a loose bell mechanism, stray sparks. Yet each event seemed to follow in Samuel's shadow, like a trail of footprints he never intended to leave. One evening, Dr. Rowe walked Samuel through the orchard behind the Harrington home. He asked plainly what the boy remembered of his supposed past life. Samuel hesitated, then spoke of details that no farm child could have invented. The placement of an older well that had since been filled, the names of men long dead, even the location of an orchard row that had been felled before Rowe's own birth. Each recollection aligned with the physician's knowledge of Oak Ridge's history. The child remembered not merely places but moods, the fear that had gripped the town during a fever 20 years past, the taste of ash in the air after a great fire, the sorrow of funerals Rowe himself had attended as a young man. Midway through the conversation, Samuel turned suddenly toward the east and said, "It was there they found me, under the elm." When pressed, he described with disquieting precision a burial unmarked by stone or cross, the body of a boy drowned in the river and hastily laid in shallow earth. Rowe felt his chest tighten, for he recalled the story. An unnamed child washed ashore in 1827, buried quickly and forgotten. Samuel had described the place as though he had been lowered into the soil himself. The physician struggled against superstition, telling himself perhaps Samuel had overheard the tale from villagers. Yet the way the boy spoke of the cold earth pressing in, of the taste of river water in his lungs, made Rowe shudder. He wrote that night, "If memory alone, it is the most elaborate mimicry of suffering I have ever heard. If not memory, then something darker." But the most chilling moment came days later when a second body was found, this time in the present. A young farmhand drowned in the same river, his corpse dragged onto the muddy bank by horrified neighbors. When Rowe arrived, Samuel stood among the crowd, silent, his face pale but unsurprised. And then, with the composure of someone repeating a truth already lived, he murmured, "It was quicker for him than it was for me." Those nearby gasped, some drawing back as though the boy's very presence carried contagion. Dr. Rowe forced the others away, determined to question Samuel alone. But the boy offered nothing further, only staring at the body as if seeing a mirror across time. The town began to whisper in earnest then, voices lowering in taverns and church pews. Was the child cursed? Was he carrying some punishment upon them all? The minister insisted no Christian should heed such whispers, but even his sermons carried a tremor. Rowe could sense it. Oak Ridge was approaching a threshold. The village would soon either turn on the boy or be consumed by his mystery. That night, Samuel approached the physician's house and knocked once, softly. When Rowe opened the door, the child stood in the lamplight, with eyes darker than Rowe had ever seen. His words were measured, deliberate. "I need to show you where it began." The words clung to Dr. Rowe's mind like frost on glass. He studied the boy in the lamplight, hesitant, uncertain if he was about to indulge madness or confront something far more profound. Samuel's face held no trace of jest. His stillness, his unwavering eyes conveyed the gravity of a promise rather than the whim of a child. Against his better judgment, Rowe fetched his cloak and lantern, and together they walked into the night. The path wound through the orchard and into the woods beyond. The air was sharp with the lingering bite of early spring, and the only sound was the crunch of soil beneath their boots. Samuel led the way with unnatural confidence, as if retracing steps long etched into memory. At last, they stopped before an ancient elm, its trunk warped and scarred by storms, its roots spreading like veins across the damp earth. "This is where I ended," the boy whispered, "and where I began again." Rowe crouched, raising his lantern to the ground. The soil bore faint signs of disturbance, as though the earth itself refused to settle after having once received its burden. He felt his breath shorten, recalling the tale of the drowned child buried hastily 2 decades earlier. The place matched the boy's description precisely. Yet what chilled the physician most was not the memory of the story, but the sensation that the ground itself seemed aware of their presence. The lantern flame trembled, though no wind stirred. Rowe reached instinctively for the boy's arm, only to recoil at the coldness of his skin. Samuel did not flinch. He merely stared down, as if greeting an old friend. "Do you see?" he asked. "It does not forget. Neither do I." Rowe found himself torn between dread and the compulsion to know more. He demanded the boy explain what he remembered of that night: the river, the drowning, the hurried burial. Samuel spoke quietly, describing the struggle of water against his lungs, the muffled prayers of strangers lowering his body, the darkness that followed. But then, in a tone that made the doctor's hair rise, he added, "I woke again, not where they left me, but walking alone in the snow, and nothing had changed." The implications gnawed at Rowe's reason. If this was no fevered dream, then Samuel had crossed some border men were never meant to return from. He felt the full weight of the boy's question. Was this survival or something else? Something outside of nature? He wrote later in his journal, "The possibility must be considered that time itself fails to exert dominion over him. The boy is not merely spared by chance. He is unclaimed by the very law of decay." Yet Oakridge would not accept such speculation kindly. Already rumors swelled. Men muttered in taverns that the Harringtons were cursed for sheltering him. Women clutched their children tighter when Samuel walked past. A young girl was found in tears after he smiled at her, claiming she saw shadows stirring behind his face. The minister, though cautious in words, preached that some souls were never meant to walk the earth again. Rowe knew the tide was turning. The village was preparing to shift from curiosity to fear, and from fear to judgment. But even as he considered warning the Harringtons, Samuel turned to him beneath the elm and spoke a sentence that rooted the physician to the spot. "It will happen again, and I cannot stop it." Those words echoed in Dr. Rowe's ears long after he and Samuel had returned from the elm. They carried the finality of prophecy, not the vague fear of a child. The boy had spoken with the weary certainty of someone who had seen the same ending too many times. That night, the physician lay awake, staring at his ceiling beams, unable to rid himself of the thought that Samuel did not merely remember the past, he foresaw its return. The following week confirmed his unease. A stable hand was injured when a beam gave way in the Harrington barn. Though the accident left him shaken, he swore Samuel had called out a warning just before the wood splintered, sparing his life. It was the second time the boy's premonitions had matched reality, and it spread through the town like spilled ink. Now whispers rose not of sympathy but of suspicion. If the child could predict disaster, perhaps he caused it. Rowe tried to maintain a rational front. He explained to the townsfolk that keen observation could sometimes resemble foresight, that Samuel might notice small signs others ignored. But his own notes betrayed his doubt. He wrote, "The boy not only senses what comes, he dreads it as though reliving a memory, not anticipating a possibility. It is as if his future is merely the repetition of an already trodden path." Samuel himself grew more withdrawn. He spent hours by the riverbank staring into the current as though searching for a reflection not visible to others. One evening, Rowe approached him and asked why he lingered there. The boy replied, "It always starts here. The river takes one, then it takes another. Each time it begins the same." His voice did not tremble. It was not fear, but resignation that colored his tone. The physician pressed further, demanding to know what he meant by each time. Samuel turned to him, his face lit by the fading sun. "Because I have seen Oakridge die before. Not all at once, but in pieces like rot creeping through the roots. It begins with water, but it ends with fire." The words gnawed at Rowe. He longed to dismiss them as imagination, but they rang too close to the fever and fire Samuel had described in uncanny detail weeks earlier, events from the village's own past. Could it be that the boy was trapped in some endless cycle, condemned to witness and relive Oak Ridge's tragedies? If so, why had he returned? And more terrifying, what role did he play in the calamities he foretold? As spring deepened, tensions thickened. Farmers began to complain of withering crops near the Harrington property. A child fell ill with sudden seizures, and though Rowe found no trace of contagion, mothers whispered that Samuel's presence had summoned the sickness. A meeting was held in the church, where voices rose with fear cloaked as righteousness. Some demanded the boy be sent away. Others muttered of harsher remedies. Rowe stood against them, insisting that expelling the child would answer nothing. Yet even as he spoke, he felt the weight of their stares. They doubted not only Samuel, but the physician himself, as though his defense made him complicit in whatever curse plagued Oak Ridge. Later that night, Samuel appeared at Rowe's door once more. His face was pale, his hands cold, but his eyes were steady. "It has started," he said simply. "The river won't keep its secrets much longer." The boy's words struck Dr. Rowe like a verdict already delivered. He had lived in Oak Ridge long enough to know that rivers did, in fact, keep secrets, the remains of accidents, the hushed grief of families who never recovered their dead. But Samuel had not spoken of grief or loss. He had spoken with a grim certainty, as though the river itself were a conspirator. 2 days later, a body surfaced. It was a young woman, no one from Oak Ridge, her clothing foreign and her face unrecognizable after weeks in the current. The villagers gathered at the banks as she was pulled ashore, their murmurs rising like insects at dusk. No one knew who she was or how she had come to the river. Samuel stood among them, silent, his gaze fixed upon her as if greeting something inevitable. When Rowe tried to question him, Samuel murmured, "Not the first, not the last. They come back, even if no one remembers." The villagers heard him, and the unease that had been brewing turned to open fear. That evening, in hushed gatherings, men whispered of curses, of drownings that heralded disaster. Mothers locked their doors earlier, and even the church bells sounded strained when they tolled for the stranger's burial. Rowe found himself caught between his training and his dread. His notes became more fevered, no longer detached observations, but desperate attempts to pin order to chaos. The boy's knowledge cannot be dismissed as accident. His recollections and predictions align too precisely with events as they unfold. Whether this stems from unnatural memory, delusion with coincidental accuracy, or something beyond nature altogether, I cannot yet determine. Yet he speaks as one burdened by a knowledge he does not choose to carry. Samuel grew more direct in his questions. He asked Rowe about the nature of death, not with the curiosity of a child, but with the insistence of someone seeking confirmation. "Does the body end, or does it linger?" he pressed one night. "When you see the dead, are they truly gone or only waiting?" His voice carried no tremor, yet his eyes betrayed a quiet torment. It was as if he wanted Rowe to contradict what he already believed, that death was not release, but repetition. By midsummer, Oak Ridge's patience had thinned. A meeting was convened, more heated than the last. Some argued that Samuel should be sent away, others that harsher action might be necessary. The Harringtons defended him, but even their voices faltered. Fear had spread like rot through the village, and the boy had become its symbol. The minister, cautious yet shaken, sought Rowe in private. "You are a man of learning," he said, "but even you must see that this child unsettles the order God has made. If his presence brings calamity, is it mercy to harbor him?" Rowe could not answer, for his own convictions were fraying. He had once sworn to preserve life, but what if this child was beyond life, or worse, outside of it? That very night, as if mocking the debates of men, another incident struck. The river swelled after a sudden storm, and the old mill collapsed under the pressure. No lives were lost, but the ruin left the town shaken. Samuel was found standing near the wreckage before the storm had even passed, drenched but unharmed, his expression unreadable. When Rowe demanded to know why he had gone there, the boy simply said, "Because I remember it falling before." The physician realized then that Oak Ridge was approaching a fracture point. The boy's words were no longer vague prophecies, but declarations tied to events unfolding before their eyes. And though Rowe longed to dismiss them as chance, each incident tightened the noose around the village's belief that Samuel was both witness and herald of their ruin. Later that evening, when the physician returned home, he found a note slipped beneath his door in an unfamiliar hand. It contained only a single line. "The boy does not speak of what he knows. He speaks of what he has done." The message burned in Dr. Rowe's hand as though the ink itself carried accusation. He read it again beneath the lantern light, his pulse quickening. Who had written it? A villager too fearful to sign their name? Or someone who believed Samuel not only foresaw tragedies but caused them? The ambiguity gnawed at him. The physician had long balanced reason against dread, but this note tipped the scale. If it were true, then Samuel was no mere victim of circumstance, no haunted vessel of memory. He was an agent, however unwilling, in shaping events. Rowe spent that night pacing his study, torn between disbelief and suspicion, until exhaustion claimed him. The next morning he set out to confront the boy. He found Samuel alone in the Harrington orchard, kneeling in the dirt. At first Rowe thought him praying, but as he drew nearer, he saw the child had been carving shapes into the soil with a stick, circles intersecting, lines radiating outward like a map of unseen forces. Samuel looked up calmly and said, "They're patterns. They always repeat." Rowe crouched beside him, unsettled. "What do you mean by patterns?" Samuel pressed his palm into one of the circles. "First the water, then the sickness, then the fire. Always the same. No matter what I do." His voice carried neither fear nor pride, only the exhaustion of someone rehearsing an old script. Later that week, Rowe returned to the site by the elm where the boy had once led him. This time, he dug. His spade struck earth that crumbled too easily, soil looser than it should have been after decades. A few feet down, he found what he feared: fragments of bone, small, fragile, unmistakably human, the drowned child of 1827, or what was left of him. The discovery confirmed Samuel's knowledge could not be dismissed, yet it also deepened the terror. If the boy remembered this burial as his own, then whose bones lay here? Was Samuel the same child reborn, or something that merely wore his memory? Rowe wrote with trembling hand, "The identity of the remains raises the most dreadful possibility. The boy is both witness and residue, an echo of what the ground once held. He is tethered to death itself, not freed by it." When Rowe presented his finding to the town council, they received it with dread rather than clarity. Instead of easing suspicion, the revelation inflamed it. The villagers muttered that if bones had been buried once, perhaps more would follow. That Samuel's presence was not chance, but curse. A shadow spread over Oak Ridge, more suffocating than any storm. One evening, Samuel appeared at Rowe's door again. This time his face betrayed unease, a rare crack in his composure. "They'll come for me soon," he said, "and when they do, you must decide if you'll let it happen or if you'll see the truth with me." "What truth?" Rowe demanded. The boy hesitated, then placed a folded piece of paper on the physician's desk. It was filled with diagrams, the same circles and lines Rowe had seen in the orchard, expanding outward like ripples in water. In the center was a single phrase, scrawled in a child's hand. "It begins with me, But it does not end with me. That night, Roe dreamed of fire. He awoke to the sound of distant bells and the acrid smell of smoke drifting through his window. Somewhere in Oakridge, something was already burning. Dr. Roe rushed into the street, the distant glow staining the night sky. Villagers were already gathering with buckets, their shouts fractured by fear. The Harrington barn was ablaze, flames leaping higher with each gust of wind. Horses screamed inside until the timbers collapsed, silencing them in a single dreadful crack. Samuel stood at the edge of the crowd, his face illuminated by firelight. He made no attempt to run, no gesture of surprise. He watched as though he had seen it all before, and perhaps he had. When Roe reached him, the boy only said, "The fire always comes after the river. You can't change the order." For the villagers, that was enough. The murmurs began at once, low at first, then swelling into fury. They called him a curse, an omen, the root of calamity. Men who had once dismissed whispers now clenched their fists, ready to act. Roe placed himself between the boy and the mob, his voice hoarse from shouting over the flames. "This is coincidence. A storm swelled the river, and a lantern overturned this barn. You cannot hang a child upon misfortune." But his words found little ground. Fear had hardened into certainty. One farmer spat, "Coincidence? Then why does he always know? Why does he stand watching as if it were his doing?" Another added, "If he stays, Oakridge will fall." That night, Roe carried Samuel back to his home, refusing to leave him at the Harringtons, who were themselves shaken by the fire. In the quiet of his study, he demanded answers. "If you know these things, tell me the truth. Are you causing them?" Samuel's eyes darkened, though his voice remained calm. "I don't cause them. I remember them. The fire burned before. The river drowned before. It repeats no matter where I stand." He paused, then added, "But each time, more is lost." Roe, half mad with fatigue, pounded his desk. "What are you then? A boy? A ghost? Something trapped between?" The child did not flinch. "I am what's left when dying doesn't finish. I carry it forward." The physician recoiled from the words, horrified at both their meaning and the tranquility with which they were spoken. If Samuel truly bore the residue of death's past, then Oakridge was not merely cursed. It was tethered to a cycle it could not break. The following day, the council summoned Roe. They demanded he explain the boy's presence, his predictions, his unnatural composure. Roe argued fiercely that Samuel was no agent of ruin, but his protests were met with stony silence. At last, the minister spoke. "If he is innocent, then why do misfortunes shadow him? And if he is guilty, then why should we endanger our children?" The council resolved to remove the boy from Oakridge. Some pressed for exile, others for harsher judgment. Roe left the meeting with his heart pounding, knowing the tide had turned beyond his reach. When he returned home, he found Samuel already waiting for him, seated in the physician's chair as though it belonged to him. The boy looked up calmly and said, "They will not let me stay. When they send me away, you must choose. Follow me or never know why it returns." The ultimatum rang in Dr. Roe's mind long after Samuel had spoken it. He was a man trained to dissect symptoms and chart causes, but here was no malady of flesh. This was a sickness of time itself, if sickness it could be called. The boy spoke with neither plea nor threat. His tone was as matter-of-fact as a physician reciting a diagnosis. The following morning, Oakridge was awash in suspicion. Farmers came to Roe's door demanding answers. Some urged him to hand Samuel over before calamity deepened. Others whispered that he too was infected by the boy's presence, his defenses proof of complicity. It became clear to Roe that Oakridge's patience had snapped. The council would not wait for reason. They would act. Samuel seemed to sense this inevitability. That evening he confided to Roe with startling calm, "They will try to end me, but they cannot. If they drive me away, the pattern will only repeat. If they kill me, I will wake again." He paused, and with a trace of sorrow added, "But I will not wake alone. Others will follow." This was the first time the boy hinted at a contagion of his condition, and the thought chilled Roe more than fire or flood. If death could be defied not by one anomaly but by many, what would remain of human order, of faith, of time itself? He wrote in his notes that night, "If the child's state can spread, Oak Ridge will not simply suffer, it will unravel." Soon after, the inevitable confrontation came. Villagers gathered outside Roe's house at dusk, torches in hand, faces carved with the determination of those who have chosen fear over doubt. Their voices rose in unison. "Send him out." They demanded Samuel be delivered to them, to be cast beyond Oak Ridge's borders, or worse. Roe stepped outside to plead. He argued that the boy was no architect of disaster, that exile or violence would only deepen their peril. But the mob was past reason. Their eyes darted not to Roe but to the windows of his house, where Samuel's pale face lingered in the candlelight. Inside, Samuel did not appear frightened. He stood still, hands clasped behind his back, watching the flames outside. When Roe returned to him, shaken, the boy whispered, "This is where it always turns. Once they fear me enough, they stop pretending to be merciful." The physician's instincts screamed to protect him, yet he also knew that shielding the boy would pit him against his own town, his own neighbors. It was then Samuel spoke again, low and deliberate. "If they harm me, you must follow where I go. You'll see what lies beneath Oak Ridge, what they buried long before me." The words conjured a new dread in Roe's mind. Beneath Oak Ridge, what did the boy mean? Was the cycle not merely tied to him, but to the ground itself, to the soil and the river that had taken and returned him? He imagined caverns under the village, or graves uncounted, histories denied. Whatever truth Samuel carried, it was vast enough to consume not only a child, but the land itself. The mob pounded on his door. The Harringtons, who had once defended the boy, now stood among them, grief-stricken by the fire that had destroyed their barn. Their loyalty had cracked. Roe felt his isolation sharpen, the line between him and the village cut by torches and fear. And in that charged moment, Samuel placed his hand on the physician's arm and said with a clarity that froze him in place, "If you betray me tonight, you will see me again, in the faces of your own children." The threat, or was it a prophecy, struck Dr. Roe deeper than the roar of the mob outside. He stared at Samuel, who held his gaze with unnerving calm. There was no malice in his voice, no raised tone. It was delivered like a promise that required no belief, only patience. Roe felt his stomach churn, because for the first time he wondered if the boy's condition was not an anomaly, but an inheritance. Outside, fists hammered against the door, voices rising into a chant of fury. The physician drew the curtains and urged Samuel into the cellar, yet the boy resisted. "They will come whether we hide or not," he said. "They always do. The only choice you have is to know why." Roe pressed him, desperate, his whisper harsh. "Then tell me. Explain it so I can defend you. Explain what you are." Samuel lowered his eyes and answered with the tone of confession. "I have died many times, but never left. Each death brings me back, but changed. The memories stay, the faces blur, the pain repeats. Sometimes I awaken as a child, sometimes older, but always here, always Oak Ridge. The ground holds me as much as the river." The physician felt his knees weaken. The boy's words aligned with the pattern Roe had pieced together. The drowned child, the old fevers, the fires. Samuel was not a singular event, but a cycle given flesh, a remnant tied to Oak Ridge itself. Rowe wrote in his mind, even as the mob howled, "He is not surviving death, but accumulating it." The pounding at the door ceased, replaced by silence thick as tar. Rowe peered through the shutters. The villagers had dispersed, but not in surrender. He recognized in their quiet departure the resolve of those who had chosen to act in secret, away from witnesses. They would not abandon their fear. They would bide their time until the boy was vulnerable. That night, Samuel spoke more than he ever had before. He described drownings that came like clockwork, fevers that spread through the same families generation after generation, and fires that leapt from barns to homes as though drawn by memory. Each catastrophe, he insisted, had returned in cycles, and each time he had been there, silent, enduring, unable to alter the sequence. When Rowe asked why he remembered when no one else did, Samuel's answer was chilling, "Because I am the remainder. When Oak Ridge forgets, I am what it leaves behind. I am its memory given a body." The physician could not sleep. He sat in his study, the boy's words rattling in his skull. If Samuel was indeed the vessel of Oak Ridge's tragedies, then the town's plan to cast him out or destroy him would not cure them. It would only force the cycle to return in some other form, perhaps worse. He considered writing to authorities beyond Oak Ridge, but dismissed it. What official would believe such a tale? No, the burden fell upon him alone. At dawn, Rowe confronted Samuel with one last plea. "If the cycle cannot be broken, why confide in me at all? Why not endure it in silence as before?" Samuel's reply froze him. "Because this time is different. This time it isn't just me. Others are waking too." The words settled over Dr. Rowe like a pall. He studied Samuel's face, seeking some flicker of exaggeration, some trace of childish fancy. But the boy's expression was devoid of guile, his voice carrying the same stillness it always had. If what he said was true, then Oak Ridge faced not a single anomaly, but a gathering tide. Rowe pressed him urgently. "Who are they? Where?" Samuel's eyes shifted toward the window where the morning sun cut through the mist. "Not here," he whispered, "not yet, but they stir where death has pressed hardest. Some are older than me, some newer. We are fragments scattered through time, rising when the ground refuses to forget." The physician recoiled at the idea. Fragments of memory wearing flesh, caught between life and death, multiplying across generations. The implications gnawed at his reason. If Samuel was only one of many, then Oak Ridge was but a single page in a story written far wider. And if these others awoke, what would they bring with them? That afternoon, the town's unrest sharpened into menace. Rumors spread that Rowe was hiding not just a boy, but a demon. A group of men approached his home, less a mob than a delegation of vengeance. Their leader, a farmer whose son had nearly drowned in the river weeks earlier, declared, "If you keep the child, you choose him over Oak Ridge." Rowe stood firm, though his voice trembled. "Samuel is not the cause. He is a symptom. Drive him out, and the pattern will only return." But the farmer's eyes hardened. "Then let him return somewhere else." The men left, but the message was clear. Time had run short. Rowe locked his doors, yet he knew locks meant little against desperation. Samuel seemed unshaken. In fact, he appeared almost expectant. That night, as thunder rolled in the distance, Samuel spoke with a gravity that silenced even the storm. "They are not afraid of me," he said. "They are afraid of what I remind them. They feel it too, though they bury it under prayers and anger. They know the ground here is restless." Rowe, his patience frayed to shreds, demanded, "Then tell me plainly, what do you want from me?" The boy's reply was chillingly simple. "To see it through. To stand with me when it comes. You are the only one who listens." Sleep eluded Rowe once more. He turned over the boy's words, considering whether he was being drawn into delusion or into truth too dreadful for the town to face. His notes grew frantic. If others awaken, Oak Ridge may not stand against the weight of so many memories. The boy seeks not protection but witness. The question becomes, witness to what? Near dawn, Roe heard movement in his house. He rushed to his study, lantern in hand, and found Samuel at his desk, calmly flipping through his ledgers. The boy had circled entries in the physician's notes, descriptions of past fevers, drownings, and fires, marking them with strange symbols. When Roe demanded an explanation, Samuel answered without turning, "You kept the record, but I lived it. Together it tells the whole." The storm outside broke then, rattling the windows. As the lightning flashed, Roe saw a figure in the yard, a man watching his house, face pale, clothes drenched, though the rain had only just begun. Roe rushed to the window, but the figure was gone. He turned back to Samuel, heart hammering, but the boy only murmured, "The first of the others has found us." The statement landed in Dr. Roe's chest like a blow. He stared at Samuel, his throat dry, his mind scrambling to dismiss the vision of the figure outside as a trick of lightning. Yet the boy's tone carried no doubt. He spoke not of possibility, but of inevitability. Roe demanded, "Who was it?" "What did I see?" Samuel's gaze held the stillness of stone. "Someone who has carried death longer than I have. He remembers too much. He will not come to befriend us. He will come to see if I still endure." The storm raged against the house, wind rattling shutters and rain striking the windows with the rhythm of fists. Roe felt suddenly besieged, his home no longer a refuge, but a stage where forces unseen pressed against its walls. He moved Samuel into the cellar, insisting they hide until the storm passed, but the boy only shook his head. "You can't shut it out. Once they wake, they find each other. Always." Sleep was impossible. Roe sat with his back against the cellar wall, lantern guttering, while Samuel drew his circles and lines again in the dirt floor. Each stroke seemed deliberate, ritualistic, as if he were charting the pulse of the storm itself. At last, the boy said, "This place will not hold me much longer. The town will try, but it always ends the same." The following morning, Oak Ridge bore the scars of the tempest. Trees uprooted, livestock lost, the river swollen and violent. Yet what unsettled the villagers most was the rumor that a man, unknown and unrecognized, had been seen walking the lanes at nightfall. Some claimed he vanished when approached. Others swore his face was pale and his eyes hollow. To them, it was confirmation that Samuel had drawn evil into their midst. That night, the council came with force. Armed men banged on Roe's door, demanding Samuel be surrendered. Their voices carried not uncertainty but command. They gave him one chance: yield the boy, or be judged as his accomplice. Roe's resolve splintered. He had defended Samuel with reason, but reason no longer shielded him. Yet when he looked at the child, small, calm, impossibly old, he felt a crushing weight. If Samuel spoke true, if there were others, then abandoning him would not save Oak Ridge. It would only blind them to what was already unfolding. Still, the choice pressed mercilessly. Samuel sensed his turmoil and placed a hand on his arm. "They will break down the door soon. You must choose before they do. If you give me to them, I will return, and when I do, it will not be gentle." His eyes, for the first time, flared with something almost human, grief mixed with fury. The door shook with blows. Roe rose, sweat cold on his brow, every instinct warring with his conscience. To yield Samuel would mean betraying the one soul who had trusted him. To protect him would mean turning against his neighbors, his own people. The physician realized with a sinking heart that his survival now hung not on knowledge, but on allegiance. The wood splintered under the villagers' assault. Roe turned toward Samuel, who met his gaze steadily. Then, as if sealing fate with words carved in stone, the boy whispered, "If you stand with me now, there is no return." The words settled in Dr. Rowe's chest like iron. He stared at Samuel, hearing the splintering of wood behind him as the villagers forced their way in. He thought of his years in Oakridge, treating the sick, comforting the dying, holding infants moments after their birth, and knew that everything he had built would shatter if he chose the boy. Yet when he looked into Samuel's eyes, he saw not a child, but a vessel carrying something far older, something that had waited centuries for someone to listen. The door gave way. Men stormed into the house with torches and ropes, their faces a mask of fury fueled by fear. Rowe stood in their path, his voice shaking but firm. "You will not take him, not tonight." Shouts erupted. A heavy hand shoved him aside, but he clung to the nearest man's arm with a desperation he did not know he possessed. The struggle spilled into the study, books and papers scattering across the floor. Samuel stood unmoving, his gaze locked on the mob, as if watching a scene already rehearsed. Then something strange occurred. As the villagers closed in, their movements faltered. One by one they hesitated, their torches wavering. Rowe followed their eyes and saw what froze them. Samuel's reflection in the dark window panes was not singular. Where one boy stood in the room, the glass showed many, a line of pale figures stretching into the shadows. Some appeared older, others younger, all bearing the same unwavering gaze. A collective gasp filled the room. Several men dropped their torches, backing away, as though the floor had turned molten beneath their feet. Samuel's voice broke the silence, low but resonant. "You cannot bind what does not belong to your time." The men fled, some stumbling over each other in their haste, leaving only Rowe and the boy in the ruined study. The physician's hands trembled as he tried to gather his scattered notes, though he knew no ink could contain what he had just witnessed. Samuel sat in his chair, calm as ever, though his skin looked drained, as if the vision had drawn something out of him. "They will not stop," Samuel said softly. "They never do. They will call me a demon, a curse, and in their fear, they will make me so. That is how the pattern holds." Rowe sank into his seat, exhausted. "Then how can it be broken?" The boy studied him for a long moment before answering. "It cannot, but it can be understood. And if it is understood, it can be endured." His tone was not hopeful, but final, as though endurance was the only victory left to them. The following days blurred into tension and silence. Oakridge avoided Rowe's home, yet whispers spread like infection. The villagers spoke of reflections, of multiple faces, of a house touched by blasphemy. Children were forbidden to walk near the physician's lane. Even the Harringtons, once Samuel's guardians, bowed their heads in shame when they passed. Rowe began keeping Samuel within the house, documenting every word, every vision, every fragment the boy revealed. His ledgers filled with sketches of circles, maps of fire and flood, fragments of testimony too strange for belief, yet too precise to dismiss. More than once he caught Samuel staring into the darkened glass of the window, as though awaiting the others who mirrored him. One night, as the air thickened with summer heat, Rowe found Samuel asleep at his desk. The boy's hand clutched a scrap of paper scrawled with trembling lines. On it were 4 words, written over and over, until the page tore. "It begins again tonight." The words scrawled by Samuel were still in Rowe's hand when the first scream cut through Oakridge's humid night. He dropped the paper and ran to the window. Down by the riverbank, lanterns flickered where villagers had gathered. A child had fallen in, thrashing in the black water. By the time Rowe reached the crowd, the boy was pulled ashore, lifeless. His mother wailed as neighbors stood frozen, knowing what they would say even before anyone spoke. Samuel had foretold it. The physician turned, and there Samuel was, standing at the edge of the gathering, pale and unmoving. The villagers parted as though he carried a plague, their faces twisted with hatred and dread. One man spat. He knew it would happen. Another shouted, "He called it to us." Their voices swelled, merging into a tide of accusation. Rowe tried to push forward, shielding Samuel with his body. "This is coincidence," he insisted, though the words sounded brittle in his own ears. "The river claims lives every summer. You cannot hang prophecy on tragedy." But the villagers no longer listened. In their eyes, the cycle had already condemned the boy. The minister stepped forward, his face drawn with grief and fear. "Doctor, this cannot continue. Whether he causes it or only reflects it, his presence brings death." His voice trembled. "For the sake of Oak Ridge, he must be delivered to God's judgment." That night, Samuel was taken under guard, not to exile, but to confinement. The council declared he would be kept in the old asylum on the edge of town, a place long abandoned, its halls echoing with damp and mildew. Rowe protested furiously, but he was cast aside, his voice drowned beneath the cries of the fearful. The asylum was a ruin. Iron bars rusted, windows shattered, corridors lined with shadows. Samuel was placed in a cell, and for the first time, Rowe saw a flicker of something new in his eyes. Not fear, but fatigue, as though this too was a chapter he had endured before. "It always comes to this," he murmured as the door closed behind him. Rowe managed to gain permission to visit, under the guise of medical supervision. He found Samuel seated against the wall, tracing patterns in the grime with his fingertip. The boy greeted him without surprise. "They will call it mercy, but they are only delaying what they fear. Even here, it will not stop." In the days that followed, strange accidents spread through the asylum. A guard fell down a staircase after swearing he saw someone standing in the hall who vanished when approached. A lantern flared and burst without cause, scorching the wall near Samuel's cell. Patients whispered of footsteps in the night, more than the boys, more than the staffs, as though others walked unseen through the corridors. Rowe pressed Samuel for answers. The boy's reply chilled him. "They are close now. I can feel them. They wait where walls are weakest, where memories leak through. This place is full of them." One evening, Rowe discovered a hidden ledger beneath Samuel's cot. Its pages were filled with cryptic diagrams and symbols, but among them were words, accounts of deaths, drownings, fires, recorded in meticulous detail. Some matched Oak Ridge's history, others described events Rowe had never heard of, tragedies from years and places far beyond their town. The handwriting, though childlike, bore the mark of age, as if rewritten countless times. When he confronted Samuel, the boy looked up, calm but unyielding. "I write what I remember, and I remember too much." That night, Rowe left the asylum with the ledger clutched to his chest, his heart pounding. He knew then that the truth was not contained in Oak Ridge alone, but stretched across years and miles, bound together by the same echo of death. And Samuel was not its source, only its vessel. But as he locked his study door and opened the ledger again, he froze at the final entry, written in darker ink, fresher than the rest. It bore no date, only a sentence. "Tomorrow the doctor drowns." The words stared up at Doctor Rowe from the ledger like an epitaph written in advance. He read them again and again, hoping the letters might rearrange into something harmless, but they remained fixed, as though time itself had inscribed them. His throat tightened. It was one thing to document Samuel's visions, another to see his own fate spelled out with such precision. Sleep abandoned him that night. He sat by his lantern, listening to the restless silence of Oak Ridge. Every creak of the floorboards, every groan of the rafters felt like the prelude to water rushing in. His rational mind tried to argue that he could avoid the river entirely, remain within his home until the curse passed. Yet beneath that reasoning grew a more dreadful thought. What if the pattern found him no matter where he stood? At dawn, he forced himself to the asylum. Samuel was awake, waiting, his eyes already fixed upon the physician, as though he had been watching him all night. "You've read it," the boy said softly. It was not a question. Rowe gripped the bars of the cell. "If you knew, why write it? Why not warn me?" Samuel's gaze did not waver. "Because warnings change nothing. The river doesn't ask, it takes. You can choose to run, but the water finds you." He tilted his head, almost gently. "But drowning isn't the end. Not for you. Not anymore." The words chilled Rowe more than the prophecy itself. Was Samuel suggesting he too would return as the boy had, tethered to the cycle of Oak Ridge? He recoiled at the thought. "I am not like you." Samuel's faint smile carried no triumph, only sorrow. "Neither was I once." That day stretched like a noose. Rowe avoided the river, avoided the streets, locked himself in his study with the ledger pressed against his chest. Yet even there he heard it, the low murmur of water where there was none, the trickle of currents under floorboards, the lap of unseen waves against his chair. As dusk fell, the sound swelled into a roar in his ears until he could no longer breathe. Driven by desperation, he fled into the night, lanterns swinging wildly. His feet carried him, despite his terror, toward the river. Oak Ridge lay quiet, houses shuttered as though the town itself waited. At the bank, the swollen current writhed like a living thing, black and merciless. Rowe stood frozen, his chest tight as if the water itself pulled at his lungs. Then he saw him, Samuel, standing on the far side of the river, though no bridge crossed it. The boy's pale figure gleamed faintly in the dark, steady as stone. His voice carried across the torrent, clear as if whispered in Rowe's ear. "Do you believe me now?" The ground gave way beneath the physician's feet. Cold water engulfed him, the river closing like a grave. He fought, thrashed, but the current was stronger. The last thing he saw before the world darkened was Samuel's face, calm, ancient, and unblinking. When Rowe's body was found downstream the next morning, the villagers said little. Some called it proof of the curse, others a final punishment for defying God's will. The asylum was found empty, Samuel's cell unlocked, his presence vanished without trace. Only the ledger remained in Rowe's ruined study, its last page bearing fresh words in the same trembling hand. It begins again. And so Oak Ridge moved on, as towns always do, burying its tragedies beneath routine and silence. Yet those who passed the river swore they sometimes saw a figure on its banks, a boy unchanged, waiting, watching, remembering. The events surrounding Samuel Harrington remain unsolved, their meaning unsettled. Was he a child caught in an endless cycle of tragedy, or the embodiment of Oak Ridge's darkest memory? Could his fate have been altered, or was he the herald of inevitability itself? Perhaps the greater question lingers not in him, but in us. If memory itself refuses to die, what do we become when we can no longer forget? Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more stories where the past is never truly past. Because sometimes what refuses to fade is what shapes us most.